Worried about fat? What is it actually? Well, let's chat about it. Hey, I'm Mike,
And I'm Toying.
and welcome to another episode of 40 Plus Fit, the podcast where we unpack the science of sustainable weight loss and fitness for those over 40. How are you today, Twain?
I am good. I'm feeling great. I'm actually
Good.
on a as of this recording, I'm actually on a cut right now, but I feel fantastic.
On a cut.
Yeah. This what we're doing, what we're calling a mini cut. So basically it's just a very aggressive cut to shave off as much fat in a short time in as short a time frame as possible. Before we kind of go back into the bulking phase. It's like a cleanup.
So it's a mini cut, right? That's why you're still able to smile.
No, actually, the funny thing is, a mini cut is a lot more aggressive than a regular cut. Because a
Oh,
regular cut, you would do it
oh
more gradually.
my.
The idea of a mini cut is to lose as much of the fat as possible when you have a decently high amount of body fat, you know? So it's kind of like, because in the muscle building process, we put on fat as we gain weight, right?
Hmm.
It's not all muscle. Yeah, I wish it was, but it's not all muscle because unless you're not natural, maybe then that's a different story. But if you're doing it naturally like I am, you have to put on some weight, and in the process, you put on a little bit of fat. Now, it gets to a point where you put on too much fat and you need to clean it up because trying to gain any more weight will also result in a lot more fat gain, which then results in very minimal muscle gain. So, what we are doing right now is we're just cleaning up as much of the fat as we can to resensitize the body back to the bulking process. Which means, again, when I go back into bulking, I'll be able to put on more quality weight again.
Oh, interesting. For those that are listening to this for the first time, as we said in the intro, is we focus on fitness and weight loss for the crowd of over 40-year-olds. Twain, our
Yes.
dear friend here, is a trainer, but also a bodybuilder, amateur, soon to be professional bodybuilder.
No, just pure amateur. I haven't even I haven't even done the first proper show as
That's
of
why we said soon to be pro. Get your what?
um
IFBB pro, right? But he also does online coaching as well as local coaching in Singapore for the people that are looking to get back into fitness and lose weight. You can be reached at the website of fitforlife.io, and the
yeah.
four is a number four, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I mean like even though I do a lot of bodybuilding stuff, you know, I would say 99% of my clients are not bodybuilders. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
It's all just general fitness. And if you think about it, right, the reason why I like bodybuilding or why find it such a fun thing to do is because it's actually at its core really about having a very fit and active lifestyle. If you look at the old school bodybuilders, the types, you know, of like Steve Reeves, even talking about the Arnold era and stuff, they were always, you know, active. Their cardio, they would go to the beach and run, you know, they were all about like enjoying themselves, balancing things out, and eating pretty well. And that's the core tenets of just living like a generally healthy and fit lifestyle. Now, do you
Hmm.
have to be like a massive bodybuilder, build a ton of muscle? You probably don't need to. You know, I don't think that's everybody's like deal.
Yeah.
But everybody can still follow those principles and lead like a very high quality of life in your chosen activity. So that's why, yeah. So that's the appeal of it, you know,
I think it's there's different things that appeal to different people.
for sure.
And so whatever floats your boat is always good. But I just want to jump onto this quite quickly. It's like we spoke there in the beginning. We gave it a little bit of an intro and it wasn't scripted. But let's just jump back to that where you're going
Oh,
through a
sure.
cut, right? You want to
Yeah.
strip away some fat so that you can get back to the building process of the bodybuilding. Now, funny enough, today we are talking about fat.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's a distinction between the fat we were discussing, the fat that you want to lose, and the fat that we eat.
Hmm.
Is that true or not?
Yeah, definitely there is a huge distinction. Because the fat that you want to lose is the actual body fat on your body. The fat that you eat is the nutrient that you need to take in to kind of help you sustain proper function in the body. So fat is one of those things where I think it's got this bad rep initially, right? Where everybody says, oh, in order to lose weight, you got to drop a lot of fat. And then I think last week's episode we covered carbs, right? And then you know the pendulum swung around to like, oh, in order to lose weight, you gotta drop all the carbs and eat more fats, and so it just keeps swinging back and forth and front and back, not even just side to side, it's like front and back, all sorts of different directions. Some people, start to go in very weird directions. But the truth is your body needs fat. Like fat is essential to a lot of metabolic functions in the body. If we look at it from the perspective of like what our body needs, there are certain vitamins, right, that are only fat soluble. These are your vitamin A, D, E, K. They need to be they need to have fat in order for them to be absorbed properly. Fat actually also provides a decent energy source as well. You know, in terms of 1 gram of fat, it actually yields about 9 calories, okay, of energy. Compared to like carbs yield like 4 calories per 1 gram.
Mm.
Okay, and so that's something that's like, really, really good. It's like really effective energy storage source. Of course, the downside to that, as we talked about in the our carbohydrate episode, is that fats take a long while to kind of break down. So they are slow energy in that sense. And your body prefers to use it more for when you're doing lower intensity stuff because it actually has the time to slowly break it down and give you the energy. But yeah, I think that's kind of fat in a nutshell. And the distinction between like, uh, the fat that we actually eat and obviously the fat that we're trying to lose from our body.
I think for myself is like there's one more distinction I might give it.
Oh, sure.
And this is because this is in conversations with people, is that fat does not make you fat. They just share the same name, right? The overconsumption of fat will make you fat, but the overconsumption of carbs and the overconsumption of most other things is what's going to make you fat.
Yeah.
But fat in of itself is not going to make you fat. And so I've had the conversations with some people, and it's like, oh no, I cut off the fat, just give me the lean meat. And it's like, why? And it's like, oh, because I don't want to get fat. I'm like, okay, there's a slight difference between the two. One is you're consuming it.
Sure.
The other one is what's actually on you. But that's one thing I just wanted to get out. Now, the other part that we look at is fat actually comes into, there's also just like carbs, right? We spoke about this and we broke it up last week.
Yep.
Carbs comes into different kinds of categories. Now, fat also comes into different kinds of categories.
Yep.
Perhaps you could share about that.
Yeah. So fat has multiple different categories. I think primarily there are three. Um, the first one is you have saturated fat. Second one, you have unsaturated fat, of which there are like two subtypes. You have the mono, you have the poly unsaturated. And then there's a third category of trans fat, which is a bit more of a human innovation, if you will. Yeah. So so it just briefly, saturated fats tend to be commonly occurring in a lot of animal-based products. So you're talking like butter, cheese, fattier cuts of meat, and of course the fat from animals in the form of lard as well, right? Then there are some plant oils as well that actually give saturated fats. So you have your coconut oils, your palm oils, um, cacao butter, I think something like along those nature. So these are some of the common sources. Now, saturated fat, I think in terms of the health effects, on the whole, saturated fat can increase your LDL cholesterol. Okay. And generally you're always advised, to moderately consume those. But the thing is, if you actually look at the different subtypes of saturated fat, there are certain saturated fats that are actually totally fine, and they actually encourage what we call LDL receptor activity. So they're kind of, in a sense, healthier for you. They help you, trigger the receptor sites in your body to kind of pull the LDL from the blood, right? And those are actually kind of healthy for you in a sense. So one example would be yogurt. If you eat yogurt, there's saturated fat in there, but actually it's pretty good. But broadly, if you're getting your saturated fat from, like a lot of fatty, animal meats and stuff, you're likely to be moving down that direction where you're increasing the LDL cholesterol and then increasing the heart risk. All right, so that's the saturated fat like category. Now, in in response to that, there's the unsaturated fat category, and unsaturated fat. The difference between these two are all about the chemical bonds in the carbon chain of the fat molecule itself. Okay, so we don't have to really go into that it's not necessary on the podcast. I know nobody really wants to listen to biochemistry a lecture here. But the main thing is unsaturated fats come in like two subtypes, as I mentioned. There's monounsaturated, there's like polyunsaturated, which again it's just about the number of double bonds in the chemical structure. But the common sources for these tend to be certain plant sources, okay? And also certain like fattier fish. So these are generally where you would get so-called the healthier fats from. And so some examples, olive oil, canola oil, peanut oil, avocados. Most nuts are great. Most seeds are great as well. And then, like I mentioned, all the fatty fish, right? Where you can get all these like really good, healthier fats. This polyunsaturated healthier fats, the monounsaturated healthier fats you get from all the plant stuff I mentioned earlier. Okay, so the health effects of these unsaturated fats tend to be generally anti-inflammatory, so they're very beneficial for your heart, for your brain. They are also quite essential to optimizing just general metabolic function in the body. So this is where you want primarily a majority of your fat sources to come from. These are what people would traditionally call the healthier fats, and then people will call the saturated fats the bad fats. And again, I'm using air quotes here because, as I explained earlier, saturated fats are not all bad. It just has some context to them. Now, these two categories are great because for the most part, most of your fat intake will comprise of these things. If you now know about it, at least you know, okay, maybe I'll eat a bit more of these nuts and seeds from my fat sources, fattier fish, so I can get some of those healthier fats in. But there's one third category, like I mentioned, it's a human innovation creating, it's called trans fats. It's created through what they call hydrogenation, which basically takes the unsaturated fat and it adds hydrogen atoms in them so that they can actually stay solid at room temperature. Because if you realize, a lot of the unsaturated fats tend to be in like an oil form for the most part. And so they make this because it's very shelf stable. They can put it in a lot of different, preservative functions for a lot of different foods. I think one of the major ones and the big hoo-ha in the early, was the 80s? Was it? I can't remember when was the timestamp for that, but like basically the 80s, I believe, or 70s, where they created margarine and there was like a lot of hydrogenated oils and stuff. And so the health effects of this is basically just like it actively increases your LDL cholesterol and decreases the HDL cholesterol. So basically the stuff that creates a lot more health risk for you, it boosts it up, and then it decreases the stuff that helps reduce the health risk. And so it does link to a lot of like heart disease and inflammation. So honestly, the health recommendation for this is just avoid trans fat as much as possible. And in fact, I think there was a large movement to ban trans fats in processed foods.
Oh,
Yeah. So a lot of times you have I think if you look at a lot of packaging nowadays, food marketing, you see some of these snacks where they'll put there no trans fats, you know.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen
It's
that.
big, yeah, it's a big thing now, with people are just actively trying to avoid this. Yeah. So that's like the, I don't know, 5-minute summary of fats.
I think you covered it quite a bit. Maybe we should just end the podcast here.
Yes, please leave all questions in the Spotify comment box.
And we'll get back to you. All right,
Yeah.
but maybe, for those that just want a little bit more,
Yes.
let's maybe look at, okay, so we're primarily speaking here to people over the age of 40, right? If I
Mm.
look at our analytics, it's people between the age of 35 and 45 primarily that are
Yes.
listening to this podcast.
Yeah.
So how would we look at how would fat intake affect weight management and overall fitness for this
It's,
particular group?
it's right. I think a large portion, and this is a large category of the people that I've been training for a better part of the past 15 years, right? Is that all these individuals past the 30s range tend to actually start to exhibit a lot of poor cholesterol kind of markers in the
Mm.
blood. Of course, a large portion of that is just because you gain a ton of weight, you get unhealthy, you're not very active, all these kind of stuff that you already know, right? I don't need to tell you that. You guys, you're in that category, you probably know already. But a lot of it tends to be like, okay, you have these cholesterol issues, whether they're brought about by lifestyle or not, it's a different thing. Some of them might be genetic. I have some clients that are like fit, shredded and stuff, but they still have cholesterol issues. They actually still need to take medication for it. That's maybe a genetic thing. Totally fine, but they're already doing what they can to mitigate the risk. And so would say that the fat intake component for this particular age group and with that slightly higher risk of having all these kind of issues, um, is a bit more important, it needs to be a bit more considered. Where are you getting your fats from? What are the types of fats you're actually kind of getting in that form the majority of your overall fat consumption? And so that's probably where we want to start. Because a lot of times when we are eating out, right, the tastiest foods are always usually the fattiest. They're the sweetest and the fattiest because again, if you remember last week's episode, we talked about this where a lot of the good tasting stuff tends to be full of fat and full of carbs, right? Or let's say, even if it's like protein, you have like pork bellies, right? I mean, that's
Oh,
tastes pretty awesome, right? Like, give me a good crackling, a good, what's the German term for it? Schweinshaxen or something
eyes
like that.
biting.
Yeah, a nice beer and a good like pork knuckle crackling, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, all this good stuff tends to be either very like high fat and maybe protein for some. A large portion of all the desserts and sweets and stuff tends to be high carb and like high fat. And so that makes up a large portion of modern food cuisine. And the issue is I think there's a lot of it that's very easily accessible. We are able to kind of pick up the phone, open up the food delivery app, and just like see what we want to pick, and it gets delivered to us.
Mm.
So it's very important to understand like we are very easily over consuming a ton of calories, and a lot of these things to make it more tasty. There's a lot of fat in there that ends up boosting the calorie amounts, making it super tasty, making it something that we want to eat more of.
So,
And that's the tricky part.
so this
Yeah.
one, if I can interject quickly, I can
Yes, please.
see play out quite a lot at the food outlet Subway. I'm not sure if you've seen this. So
Oh, no,
Subway, for
no.
those who don't know, is a healthy alternative because you go for a sandwich and then you get to choose like your protein filling, and then you can choose all the vegetables and things that you want to put on a
Yeah.
salad or whatever that you want to put onto your sandwich as well. And then they get to the final option. And the final option is they offer different types of sauces. So this is like your ketchup, your mayonnaise, your olive oil, your I don't know. There's like probably about 20 to 30 different types of sauces. So
Yeah.
oftentimes I will see people come and then they're like, okay, I want let's say the chicken breast, the roast chicken that gets put on. I'm like, okay, good choice. Well done. Oh, and I want the healthy oat bread. Fantastic. You're doing so well. Okay, then I want the salads. I want like the olives. I want the lettuce. I want the onions. Okay, fantastic. Still doing good. Then it's like, okay, I get to the sauces. I want the mayonnaise. I want the barbecue sauce. I want the ketchup. I want the mustard. And they go on to like list 8 to 10 different sauces. And I'm like, dude, after you put all this on, you might as well just have gone to McDonald's. You're gonna get the same calorie intake by the end of the day.
That's kind of true, That's kind of true.
Because
Um,
most of your fat one is coming out of the sauces, right?
for a large part,
Mm.
definitely, definitely. Well, I would say maybe depends what is the filling of the sandwich as well. If I remember correctly, Subway has like, I don't know, meatballs and stuff like this as well.
Yeah, they got quite a lot of
Or
different
put
types.
cheese
Yeah.
in there or something. So there's some
Mm.
fat components there as well. But look, like I think you bring up such a huge point, which is that a large portion of the food that we eat daily that is very tasty is usually bathed in sauces. That's become the norm. And look, like the reality is our palates are often very hyper stimulated nowadays. So when you ask somebody to eat something that's a bit more so-called plain, you eat like a regular chicken breast with like some salt and pepper or some other seasoning, with a fresh salad. Like most people will be like, oh man, that's so plain, so boring and things like this. But you realize like, wait a minute, like that's the natural um baseline order of things, right? Like there's certain flavors to these things that actually you can taste it pretty well. I mean,
Yeah.
Japanese food is probably the best example of that, where they use or like traditional Japanese food, right, where they use all they focus on the ingredients that they use, bringing out those flavors really, really well. And so a lot
Mm.
of things right now is again, it's just hyper palatable, right? And the way they're made is as such so that they have great texture. You want to eat more of it. They don't fill you up as quickly. There's, like the salt component that kind of triggers certain sensations in your mouth, in your brain as well. And then there's a combination of like the fat and the carbs together. So all these things are just like food chemistry that, has been engineered to make food that's just people can't stop. And again, like to use the Pringle example, right? It's always once you pop, you can't stop. And so a lot of times people end up, just over consuming all this stuff from all these hidden things that make the food taste way, way, way more stimulative than actually needs to be. So it's usually all
That's
this
true.
hidden in the sauces that you take, like some people, like you mentioned on Subway, they squeeze a whole ton of the ranch, mayonnaise, the olive oil, whatever it is. And like just one squirt of that is probably like close to 100 calories already.
Yeah, quite easily because
It's
it's like a
easy. It's
thick
so easy
amount.
for you to kind of get out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, for me, it's like the biggest point with regards to that is that when you're having these sauces, and it's
Yeah.
like you touched there, one squirt is already 100 calories. You don't feel that when you're having it in a sauce. It's not like when you're eating 100 calories of beef, or 100 calories of chicken. That
Yes.
one is like, oh, okay, I'm quite full already. I can feel this. But with sauces, it's like a couple of tablespoons. I barely had anything, but I've racked up the calories already. And so
Yeah.
those kind of, I don't really want to call them empty calories because,
No, I have a term for them
oh,
actually. I always tell
what?
my clients this. I call them ninja calories because
Ninja.
they're there, but they're silent, and you don't realize that they're there. So these are the ninja calories that rack up. They just stack up all throughout the day. And if you actually do like, a week where you just analyze every single thing you eat and you track it, you realize just how much of these is adding up.
True. And I like the concept, ninja calories. I think I'm going
Yeah,
to start using that
silent.
from now.
They're silent but deadly.
Yeah. And that's the thing is as you rightly point out, they rack up as you go throughout the day, but you don't really register them because they're such small amounts. The
Yeah,
actual, when I'm looking at it, it's such a small amount. I'm like maybe a tablespoon. Oh, okay, but I'm having a tablespoon at every meal.
yeah.
It's like,
And
oh,
that's easily, yeah, if you have one tablespoon at every meal, that's what, like maybe 450 calories really?
there you go. That's as we like to say, that's a 5K run.
Yeah.
So,
Like, and talking about this, it's just like when people buy Starbucks and
hmm,
ask, you want a whipped cream with that, right? So they put the whipped cream onto the top, and you stir it up, you eat the whole thing, whatever it is. Now your drink just went from, maybe, let's say if you ordered like a frappuccino or something already, that is already pretty dense, right? There's like, what, I don't know, 400 calories or so, 300 to 400 calories in of itself. But look, like if you drink that, most people would feel like relatively full.
hmm.
Then you could get the same level of fullness if you put the extra whipped cream on top, which would add another maybe 200 calories to it. And now it's a 600-calorie drink, and it's still the same level of fullness, right? It's like, oh man, most people don't realize just how much they're taking in.
But then
And
at the end of the
the
day,
worst part, no, and the worst part is they would blame the sugar. They'd be like, oh
ah,
no, this thing is filled with sugar, so that's the
that's where
issue.
I was just gonna
Ah,
go.
it's
I
the
was
whipped
just gonna
cream
say
that
the
you put
same
on
thing.
top. Yeah, it's the whipped cream that you put on top. Um,
Yeah. So that's the thing is knowing and just becoming understanding. Let's use that. Understanding the amount how calories actually work when it comes to the food that you're actually taking in. Because I'm one of those that went through that. Is when I looked at the food that I was consuming, I was like, oh, I can't understand. Why am I not losing weight? This is just ridiculous. I'm eating so little. And so
yeah,
I started using at that time was MyFitnessPal,
yes.
just so that I could start understand. And I was shocked at the amount, like each meal at the time, I think was almost getting to 800 calories. That's each meal where I was thinking, oh, this meal is 200 calories at most. But just to understand the amount of calories that's in each food item that I was consuming, it was quite eye-opening and a great exercise that I'll always recommend for people when they're starting out on that particular weight loss journey.
Yeah.
Don't look to count calories as a lifestyle, but count calories to open your eyes as to what you're actually
It's a,
eating.
it's really a teaching tool more than anything else.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to calorie track forever. Yeah.
Yes.
And probably we should talk about calorie tracking in a different episode. Man, we coming up with so many ideas here.
That's right. That's right. I shouldn't jot all these down. All right.
Yeah.
So let's get back on track. All right. So
Yes.
we've discussed the fat intake of how it affects weight management. But
Mm-hmm.
what is the importance of prioritizing the fats? Like for hormone health or even energy levels?
Uh, I would say you would want to you would want to include healthy fats, mainly because a lot of the um processes in the body, like I mentioned earlier, right? They do actually require, number one, having enough fats for them to actually function. So again, some those vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, K, all of these will need having like enough fats there for them to actually be utilized by the body. So that's the first thing. Then in terms of having certain fats that actually help with anti-inflammatory components, which is great for, again, heart and brain health, it's very, very important as well. So we talked about getting enough of those omega-3s in, with your fatty fish, or even like from flax seeds, from like nuts, walnuts, almonds even, all these kind of unsaturated fats in there as well. It's going to be
Mm.
really, really important. And if you have all these things in place, your overall energy levels generally is going to help it's going to go up. Because if you don't have these things in place and your body's just struggling to survive and struggling to push its metabolic functions throughout the day, then obviously your energy levels is going to suffer. So it's kind of like what you eat and how you take care of your body directly impacts your energy levels. And like we have just been talking about, the overconsumption that happens all the time just makes you put on more weight, right? And then that also affects your energy level. So that's another kind of like indirect way it impacts it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What would you give some tips on how to incorporate healthy fats into a diet properly?
That's actually, yeah, that's actually a pretty simple thing to do. The first one is you probably want to replace all your saturated fats with, you know, more of the unsaturated fat components. So the easiest way to do this is through cooking, right? So if you're cooking and you're using like butter for your food and stuff, you probably want to reduce that and then replace it with more like olive oil, avocado oil, even canola oil, things like this, totally fine. The other one you want to actually include in, again, those omega-3s, those polyunsaturated fats that we talked about, the fatty fish, right, would be a great option. Any kind of mackerel, salmon, or similar natures. Or add in like nuts, right? Almonds, walnuts, other types of seeds as well, pumpkin seeds, flax seeds, things like this. Then the last part here is just, generally, like we talked about, avoid trans fats products, right? Or products that have a high amount of trans fats. It's very easy to turn around, just look at the label and see, okay, what's the amount of trans fats that's in there. Um, I think that's probably the easiest one to do. And again, we very rarely say like, avoid this thing or don't eat this thing. But I think this is one of those exceptions where, yeah, you just don't want to have it in you. Because again, the reason why it's so bad for you is because the chain is just so, the molecular chain is just so stiff that it doesn't actually break down properly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So try to limit that one. Maybe not cut
Try
it
to
out
limit.
completely, in case it's difficult, but try and limit it to the best of your ability
Yeah, and
in
it
your
and
diet.
look, like the reality in terms of practical application, it tends to occur in a lot of just like processed snacks that we take, we get from a package.
Yep.
So maybe chips, maybe whatever else it is. So just turn around, look at the label, and say, okay, is there any, like, what's the amount of trans fats that's in there? If it's less than like 1 gram or so, or if there's no trans fats, it's on the label there, then great, probably you're
Mm.
fine. Yeah, our bodies are resilient enough to be able to tolerate, a certain level. Remember, the dosage is always in the poison. Sorry, the poison is always in the dosage. Always in the poison. The poison is always in the dosage. So it's how much of the thing that you're taking, because our body can handle a certain level. So it's always about, yeah, not over consuming it.
Mm. True, true, true. All right. So what about if we move on to exercise? Like, how does exercise actually impact fat metabolism in like people over the age of 40?
Oh, this is actually a really interesting one, because this pulls us back to, I think the main one I want to talk about first is pulling it back to hormone health that we mentioned
Okay.
earlier. Um, so the cholesterol in your body, right, is made up of roughly 70% is like self-generated. in your body by the liver, and the other 30% is like from dietary sources. Okay, so if you implement all the things that we just talked about with making those swaps, improving the healthier fats that you're going to get, it actually helps support a healthy amount of good cholesterol in your body. And again, good cholesterol is also a misnomer. It's not exactly good or bad. It's just like differs on the density of
Yeah.
the thing. I think for ease of reference here, I think most people will understand what I mean. So you want more of that good cholesterol because it's actually a precursor for very many of our like steroidal hormones, which is basically your sex hormones, right? All the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So if you are a female or a male who is above or getting to this like 40s range, especially for guys, we already know that our test levels or hormone levels will tend to start dropping. Same for females, because you eventually go through menopause and you regulate that down, and
Mm.
your estrogen and all the stuff to tank, right? And so having enough of these good cholesterols in the body actually helps create a bit more of that basis for us to naturally produce more and support that sex hormone system. And so then, if you can produce more of that, it's going to support all the other things. For testosterone in the male body, again, that's going to help you support as much muscle mass production and growth and retention as possible, which is vital to just like, a very healthy body, right? So that's really one of the biggest reasons why we need enough fats in there. And just as a quick aside here, since we're talking about fat intake as well, I believe for those of you who are listening, you might have come across trainers, or maybe you might have friends who are bodybuilders who take steroids. Okay, and it's not about talking about steroids itself, but it's more about like you will notice that a lot of them, they can go like super low fat, very high carb, and relatively moderate high protein, and they actually still function quite okay. They get like really big, really jacked and all. And the main reason for that is because like why they can go super low fat is because they are injecting additional hormones into their body. And because they're injecting all these additional hormones, the body does not actually have the need to produce anymore. And so they can actually get away with like dropping the fats down. I mean, to be fair, they also train really hard, for the most part, right? Most of them would be training pretty hard. And then yeah, so they would maybe want to increase their carbohydrate intake and all that sort of stuff. But this is not a diet you probably want to follow where you go like super low fat, because if you're natural, what that is going to do is, as I mentioned, it's not going to support the sex hormone system itself, and you're not going to be able to produce the necessary levels, and so you end up kind of like not retaining as much muscle as you could. In fact, you might lose some muscle, and then that's just a bad time, right? Because at the end of the day, you start losing weight, but it's the wrong kind of weight, and it just ends up plateauing you out really quickly. So that's probably one of the most important things with prioritizing like healthy fats in the diet, just to support. For men, it's just to support like ensuring you are able to produce enough tests to keep those levels relatively high, at least from a dietary perspective. And then for females, it's to help you kind of with that transition through towards perimenopause into menopause.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I think that's covering it quite well by why we prioritize healthy fats for hormone health from
Yeah.
the previous thing we were chatting about. So let's move on to exercise. In last week's episode, we spoke about carbs, right? And we were talking about carbs being your primary source of energy that you could
Yes.
withdraw from and all of that. And then we briefly touched upon that actually fat is also an energy source, but it's used in a different way. Perhaps
Yeah.
today you can expand upon that a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, just as a quick refresher, I think last week we mentioned this. So, like the different energy systems, you have like fat supplying energy, you have your carbs supplying the energy, and you also have like the actual creatine phosphate system, which is just creating stores in your muscles that kind of supply energy as well. In the first little bit of energy bursts, when you suddenly do high intensity activity. So these are the three energy systems that kind of in place. And for the most part, when you're doing higher intensity stuff, you're going to pull a lot more from the creatine phosphate systems and the largely from the glycogen systems, which is your carbs. And then if you're doing like super low intensity stuff, you're just existing, lying on the couch, you're just talking now on this podcast together, We're just going for a very brisk walk. All this low intensity stuff is going to pull a lot more from the kind of the fat energy, so to speak. Okay, so that's a quick refresher on that. So how does actually exercise impact, fat metabolism in people over 40? It's not any different from anybody else that's in every other age range, to be honest. It just depends on the type of activity and the intensity of the activity you're doing. Yeah. So this is why we always emphasize, you want to make sure you are doing your strength training. You want to ensure you're also doing some degree of like low intensity cardio to get the best of both worlds, if that makes sense.
So I mean, this is going like to TikTok education again, right? But
Oh, yeah,
on,
sure.
on there, some of the people they'll suggest is that if you want to lose fat, you should target the fat. So instead of doing all the other like HIIT exercises, all that, you should
Hmm.
only be doing LISS. So LISS is like low
Uh,
intensity steady state because that one, as you explained, if you're doing slower, that one's targeting or drawing the energy from the fat sources.
yeah,
So
yeah.
is this actually true, or is this just another hype that they are building upon?
I think a lot of these things are actually based on a seed of truth, right? So it is true, but to what extent and what's the context? Any kind of extreme viewpoint or whatever is it's usually based on some seed of truth. So the seed of truth in this case is that yes, fat oxidation does happen when you do low intensity stuff. So in other words, yes, you're burning fat as you do these low intensity activities. Okay, now don't rejoice too early because fat burning is very different from fat loss. If you are burning fat, but you're also eating so much that whatever fat you burn is going to get replaced by whatever you're eating very quickly, the net difference is that you're still going to either maintain the same levels of fat storage, or if you're eating way more, they're probably going to gain more fat. Okay, so this is why some people can do all the cardio they want, but because they think, oh, I did so much cardio, I did so much exercise, I can eat whatever I want, and they
Mm.
do that and they over consume, they end up being fatter than before, right? They end up putting on more fat. Now, the difference between fat burning and fat loss is that fat loss is the net effect of how much calories, or the difference in the fat calories that the difference in the calories that you're experiencing, because how much you're putting into your body versus how much you're burning. Okay, that is where the fat loss occurs. And then if you do more weight training and strength training, then your body's going to pull that energy out, right, from its fat stores because it has no choice. Because if you're training with the weights, you're telling the body, I need these muscle tissues, I need all these things in place. You cannot rip them away. But let's say if you just dieted purely in a deficit, same thing, but you didn't train with weights, then and you weren't very active, your body would just reduce overall. Like first you pull out from the fat stores if you have enough, but you reach a point where you don't have enough fat stores and your body will be like, hey, you know what? Maybe we don't need so much muscle. And you pull away some of whatever precious muscle you already have. And then you
Mm.
start to it's like a combination of both. And that
Mm.
slows your metabolism down. That kind of leads you to a much faster plateau. So again, fat loss is all about that net loss of fat in your body. That's what we want. Okay. We don't actually want fat burning because as long as you watch your calories and you ensure that you're getting in enough activity, balanced activity, right? You're doing some cardio, you're doing a lot of weight training, and you're controlling the calories, you're definitely going to lose fat. It takes care of itself without even having to worry about that.
Mm.
Yeah. So definitely this is something that I think a lot of people conflict together, fat loss and fat burning, when they're not the same thing.
Sorry, I just want to jump off of the track a little bit. And
No, no
like
worries.
last week, we were talking about carbs, right?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, you're talking about, okay, you can use let's call it a finite number of fat before it'll push over to protein. Does that,
Sorry,
to protein,
find
to
number of
muscles,
fat. Oh, okay.
yeah, to muscle loss. So does that concept also apply from carbs to fats?
Carbs to
Like if
fat.
I'm
So
going and I'm doing the workout, let's say I'm doing a one with weights, right? And I'm
yeah.
exerting myself with the weight. So it's initially pulling from the carb, from the glucose, all of that
Yeah.
to fund or to fuel my workout.
Yeah.
Is there a period that I'm working out that will suspend my carb uh, source of energy and it will switch over to the fat source?
Uh, Yeah, definitely there is. That's when you run out of glycogen in the body to be
Mm.
used. And that only happens if you really run out of glycogen. So let me put it into perspective for you. First of all, the amount of glycogen stores you have in the body are quite numerous. And then secondly, the proportion, right, in terms of like how much energy you actually need to do something that's pretty intense, is actually not as much as you think. For perspective, 1 mN can power you to run a football field, I think, 3 times.
Oh,
That's the amount of energy that you would need roughly to be able to power you that way. It might be 2 times, or I'm not sure if 3 or 2 times, but basically you get the idea.
yeah.
Basically, 1 mN is like you can do a lot on that.
Okay.
So in the first place, number one, you have to be exercising a lot. In the second place, you have to be reducing your carb intake to almost zero for a long period of time.
Mm.
So that means like within, let's say, 10 days to 14 days, right? Up to 2 weeks or so, you need to make sure you are not taking any form of carbs, maybe trace amounts, like up to 30 grams, from vegetables, something like this. But that's it.
Okay, so if we come back to this question here, is that practically speaking, let's put it practically speaking, there's no actual exercise. If your diet, everything all the same, doesn't change. I don't stop carbs, I don't anything.
Yeah.
There's no real exercise that will shift over where I'll deplete all of my glycogen and have to shift over to a fat source, unless I'm one of those people who go running 200 kilometers, I suppose.
Yeah, maybe like again, those are very extreme examples.
Yeah. So
Most people are not
I'm
extreme.
using the extreme one to show that that's the
Exactly.
extreme
Yeah.
that you actually have to go to in order for this to really, the shift to
Yeah. In
actually
fact,
have to happen.
there's a very specific thing that when we do bodybuilding and you do like a carb depletion to flatten out as much as possible, and then you do that carb loading into the
Mhm.
competition to fill out the muscles nicely. Like you actually have to do very specific. First of all, you have to reduce the diet down as much as possible to reduce the carbs, right? And then you have to do specific what we call glycogen depletion workouts, has a ton of volume, relatively light weights, but you're just trying to get a massive pump, a ton of volume in there to pump out as much of and use up as much of the glycogen as possible. So it's like all these kind of really extreme stuff you actually have to do. Not to mention together with the extra cardio you have to do and all this sort of stuff.
Mm.
So you actually have to push your body really, 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 really to an extreme in order to have no more glycogen left. And this is irrelevant of how you feel, because
Yeah.
most people who are just sedentary or just starting to get into exercise do not have a proper benchmark of like intensity. So any exercise you do in the first place is already going to be, it's going
You'll
to feel
feel
tough.
like you're depleted already.
Yeah, you're going to feel tough. You're going to feel like, oh man, I'm so depleted. I need to eat something or whatever. But you're not. It's okay. Like you will be fine. Yeah.
Okay. So, I think you also touched upon the benefits, like when you're using strength training and cardio
Hmm.
for burning fat and building muscle. Um, what would you suggest to people? Like, how does a fat intake uh, play a role with regards to like how should I be? Is there any difference in my diet that I should be fueling for strength training for cardio? Or is that still primarily focused on carbs?
I would say that's still primarily focused on carbs. More so for the more so if you're trying to lose weight, and again, if your total calories is low and you don't have very much carbs in the first place, because we talked about this in the previous episode where I said, okay, you settle on the amount of protein you're going to take, and then you settle on the amount of fat you're going to take. And the reason why I said fat first, not carbs, is because there needs to be an essential level of fats.
Mm.
And again, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, to ensure that you have, maximum hormonal function, to ensure that you have maximum metabolic function throughout the body, right? To fulfill all these health benefits that we need. Then after you settle on the amount of fats, then you decide the balance of calories, go to the carbohydrates. Now, if you are, trying to lose weight and many of the ladies, many of the clients I deal with are ladies that are relatively petite. They may weigh these like more than they would like to, but a lot of them are very petite in stature. So they actually don't have a ton of calories to work with already in order to lose weight. And so this amount of carbs, in terms of performance for the gym, you still want to focus on where you place that carbs. And usually we'll place it before the training. The fat itself doesn't really impact the performance directly. It impacts it indirectly, because if you don't get enough fats, you're likely to experience all the hormonal issues that we mentioned. right? Yeah, so I think that's really the main thing here. Now, fats also generally can be quite satiating if you get the right amounts of fats. So they can like sit in your stomach, digest really slowly, help a bit with the feeling of fullness if you choose the right amount of fats. And then you might want to like spread that out throughout the day just so that you have enough, spread out throughout the day to keep you satisfied, if you will. Yeah.
Okay. Final question on this is like, how much does fat consumption play a part in building muscle?
Um, how much? Again, I would link it back to the optimization of body function, and again the steroidal production as well, right? Because if you don't have that going, you're not optimizing the muscle building process. So it doesn't directly help with, let's say, the performance aspect of things, but it helps with the optimization, environmental aspect of things to optimize the muscle actual outcome we're looking for.
Okay, makes sense.
So it's still super important because you need to get all
Mm.
your healthy fats
Well, it's like having an engine in a car, right? You
in.
have all the different components in the car, and all of them play their part in order to make sure that the engine runs smoothly for you to go
Yes.
forward.
Yes.
So it's the same with all your different macros, with all your different vitamins and minerals and all these kind of things that they all need to
Yeah.
play their part in order for your body to be a high performance machine,
Yeah.
which is what we all
And
aspire to.
yeah, and when we talk about fat, so I think I want to quickly touch one point because you mentioned that, right? Where um all these things play a part, right? And our topic here and our goal here with this podcast, or doing these episodes and stuff, is just to help people understand how each of these components matter. Okay. I've heard people say before, like, you don't actually need carbohydrates to survive, right? And say, yeah, you're not wrong. You could get away with not eating carbohydrates, you can go really low carb and you'll be able to survive because your body doesn't technically need them. That's why it has an alternate way of fueling itself with quick energy through the ketosis function, right?
Mm.
Generating ketones. But are you actually looking to survive? Or are you trying to give your body the most optimal setting to be as healthy as possible? And I would reckon if you are trying to do the latter, then you don't really need to cut out any of these components. You should make use of all the tools that's available to you. And now more so than ever, given the luxury we have with food availability and all.
Yeah, that's true.
Cool. I think did we cover everything? You
I
think?
think we've covered everything. I think we can end this one off with a bit of fat busting myths.
Oh, yeah, just
You
like
up
we
for
did
it?
for the carb episode. Okay, let's
Just
do
like the
this.
carb one, because there's so many myths and misconceptions that happen around these different kinds of macros that we have. So I thought, let's just
Yeah.
give it a go. So the first one, all fat is bad for you.
Yeah, we talked about this, right? And I think this one's actually a bit more nuanced than the carbs one.
Mm,
Like carbs, you can pretty much say like no, not really.
true.
But fats here, yes, there is like the trans fat components that we would really want to avoid, minimize even keep it to zero if you can. That's totally what you want to avoid. But there's also the healthy fats that you need, like literally need for survival. A large portion of that, maybe 80-90% of that should be the unsaturated fats. And then you have the saturated fats coming in at, that are incidental to the things that we eat, some of the animal fats that we take in, maybe the occasional animal-based like product like butter, yogurt, all this stuff. Some of the saturated fats, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, depending on the strain of saturated fat, they can be good for you as well.
Mm.
Yeah. So not all fat is bad for you. Some of them are really good for you and essential. And then there's some, like the trans fats, that you just want to avoid.
Okay. The next one, I need to cut out all fat to lose weight.
Yeah, no, like you shouldn't because again, you might lose weight in the first, I don't know, 2 weeks or so. But number one, you'll be super miserable. Number two, not only will you be super miserable, you will feel like shit. Just because you're not going to get your sex drive, everything's just going to drop. Because you're not producing your hormonal health is just gonna drop so
I mean,
badly.
imbalance. Mm.
Yeah, from the imbalance, you're just gonna give up really quick. So don't do that, please.
Okay. The next one, and this is something that's growing in a lot of TikTok education nowadays, is certain foods can help me target belly fat.
Outright no, man. That's, I wish that was the case, but that's not. I'm sorry. Whatever you read, no. Um, there is, and I just want to quickly say this here. We can always expand on it in a further episode, but there is a lot of growing evidence and some leaning in the evidence towards just making sure you get in exercise actually helps with visceral fat reduction. So visceral fat, if you all not familiar, is basically the inner fats that lie around the viscera and kind of contribute as well to belly fat to some degree. So if you do your exercise, you can actually target your belly fat. And I'm using this in inverted commas, to some degree, to some extent. So, I would focus more on exercise rather than trying to eat a specific type of food.
I think, as you say, that's another topic for another podcast episode.
Yeah.
All right. Next one is low fat diets are the best way to lose weight.
Yeah, I think this is similar to the other myth about cutting out fat. Probably not. There might be a stage in your diet if you have been dieting down for a while where maybe the last push you might need to drop the fat down a little bit. Sure, that happens. It happens a lot more in bodybuilding preps versus like regular dieting for most people. So it could happen, but it's not something you want to do for long. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks at most. Before you start to experience some really bad stuff again with the hormonal imbalances.
All right. I find when it's a low fat diet, oftentimes it means that's the actual amount of fat you should be eating. So the people that are going on this
Oh,
that it's working for are
yeah.
probably people that are actually over consuming fat, and so now coming onto the low fat diet is bringing them to
You
the amount that they should be consuming rather than, no fat diet.
like relative to that. Yeah, fair enough then.
Mm.
If you're talking about low fat, because again, we didn't define what's low fat, right?
Oh
But
yeah,
yeah,
we didn't define. I'm just giving another perspective.
yeah.
Not
No, so I think maybe the caveat to this would be low fat diets are the best way to lose weight if the fat amount you're taking in is meets the essential level that you need.
Yeah.
I realized we never actually discussed that essential level though.
Oh,
Um,
that's a good
so I
question.
can just very briefly mention it. It is, and this is per pound of how many grams of fat per pound of body weight. Okay, I haven't done the conversion to kilograms, so you have to convert your weight into pounds and then you times it by this factor. Usually we start people at the lowest. We want them to go around 0.25. Like that's the absolute lowest we will allow people to go. If you're calculating your amount of fat you should be taking in daily, you probably want to be around 0.3. That will be a great point where it won't be so low, it will affect your hormonal health, but it's also not so high that it takes away from, having the amount of carbs that you might want. So it's 0.3 grams per pound of body weight. So if we do that with, let's say, somebody that's 100 kilos, right? That
Mm.
will be 220 times 0.3.
Yeah. So if we go times 0.25, it's 55.
Yeah.
So
You could go even lower than that. And like I mentioned, there's some times where it might be, yeah, you might do that, but definitely
0.3 is 66.
yeah. So you definitely wouldn't want to go below that for too long.
Okay. And the final one we'll have is I can take a fat burning supplement to lose weight quickly.
I no. Yeah, just no. Most of the supplements don't do what they proclaim to do. Um, it might have some very, very minor effect that's not substantial at all on your fat burning. And as we mentioned again, fat burning and fat loss are not the same thing.
Okay.
So don't waste your money. Give it to me and I will coach you.
Yeah, go sign
Remind
up at
you.
fitforlife.io.
Yes, give it to me or give it to my team and they will remind you. I think you're gonna get a lot more benefit out of that.
All right. And I think the other thing that also, whatever benefit you do get from this is temporary because as soon as you stop taking that supplement, it's all going to come back. If you have not had any change in your lifestyle, there's no way it's not, you're going to keep it off without that supplement. And then
Yeah,
even doctors will tell you it's not a great thing to go on for
yeah.
long term. Yeah. Okay. I think that's it. Huh? I think we've covered up everything.
Yeah, I think we did.
I
Awesome.
think some things to take away is that fat is takes up a larger energy amount than protein and carbs. Protein and carbs, what is it? 4 calories each. But fat is 7 or 9. What is it?
No, no, fat is, yeah, I think it lost you for a moment there.
Ah,
The Zoom was lagging. Yeah, but you're saying fat is 9.
9. So always keep that in mind. So when it comes to your portion control, you don't take as large a portion of fats as what you do of protein or carbs.
Yes.
Keep that into mind. Limit your sources. I think that's the one of the bigger one. Um, don't no need to cut everything out. We can still enjoy our food, but just limit it. And
Yep.
then the other one is do not shy away from your fats because they help to keep your hormones in balance.
Yes.
Would you
Correct.
say that's fair? That's some of the big takeaways from this particular podcast.
100%. 100%.
Wonderful. All right. So for those of you again that found this of benefit, do share with your friends. Give us a follow on Spotify. And do let us know what you thought of the episode on Spotify. They do have the facility there to let us know. As for Twain, you have any other closing thoughts?
Nope, I'm good. I think we covered everything really thoroughly. So if you've
Well,
listened up to this point, thank you so much. Um, I'm sure there's things that, might pop up questions you might have, follow up to whatever we said. So yeah, please feel free to drop them in the comments. We're always very happy to answer questions because that gives us more things to talk about as well.
that's right. All right. So with that, we'll bid our adieu and see you all in the next
I
episode.
will see you all. Thanks so much, Mike.
All
Ciao,
right.
everybody.